The technologies shaping our lives are not neutral. They are learning from a world already organized around hierarchy and then feeding that hierarchy back to us at an unprecedented scale. Welcome back to the Revolution Resolution. I'm Malaika, New York Times bestselling author and sociologist. Over the last several episodes, we've been talking about what we are truly up against so that as we start to live differently, we are not naive, but we are fully equipped. And today I want to talk about how all of the forces we've discussed are evolving through modern technology. Because many people think of social media and algorithms as passive tools, as mirrors simply reflecting society back to us. But technologies are shaped by the values, incentives, and systems the people building them want to maintain. In a society organized around American patriarchy, our technologies reproduce that hierarchy too. When I was a little girl, I dreamed about living in California, long before I ever visited. California already existed in my imagination as beautiful, sunny, creative, and glamorous. And after eventually moving here, I realized many of those images had come from media itself. Television, magazines, movies, advertisements, stories carefully constructed and distributed at massive scale. But I also began noticing something else. I had never been surrounded by so many people, especially women and girls, who wanted to alter themselves, to be thinner or curvier, younger, more desirable, more perfect. And living in Los Angeles especially made something painfully clear to me. When people believe they are freely choosing how to shape themselves, but those desires were carefully cultivated by systems profiting from insecurity, their freedom of choice becomes much more questionable. Traditional media helped normalize impossible beauty standards, the objectification of women and girls, rigid gender roles, and sexualization of young girls long before social media existed. But social media transformed this system into something even more powerful. Because now, instead of receiving messages occasionally through television or magazines, people carry messaging systems in their pockets all day long. And these systems are not designed primarily around human flourishing. They are designed around engagement and protecting a specific social order, which means the platforms learn what keeps people watching, clicking, scrolling, reacting, buying, and returning. And unfortunately, fear, insecurity, outrage, comparison, and emotional vulnerability are incredibly profitable. The more anxious people feel about themselves, the longer they stay engaged, because anxiety is familiar to those raised in American patriarchy. The more outraged people become, the more content they consume. The more isolated people feel, the more they seek validation online. And this becomes especially dangerous for young people. Research has shown that girls on social media are disproportionately exposed to content related to dieting, appearance, plastic surgery, sexualization, and self-surveillance. Teen girls report dramatically increased rates of anxiety, depression, body shame, eating disorders, and self-harm in the social media era. And importantly, these outcomes are not accidental. Whistleblowers revealed that Meta's own internal research showed Instagram worsened body image issues for many teenage girls. And the more emotionally vulnerable those girls became, the more likely they were to remain deeply engaged with the platform. Think about what that means. The suffering itself became profitable. And this does not only affect girls. Young boys and men are also being shaped by algorithms trained to prioritize outrage, dominance, fear, and misogyny because those emotions drive engagement too. It is what they have been socialized to be familiar with. Researchers studying social media platforms found that boys vulnerable to insecurity, loneliness, or emotional struggle were often pushed toward increasingly misogynistic and extremist content. Videos normalizing harassment, content mocking women, messages equating masculinity with domination, control, and emotional suppression. At the same time, white supremacist groups, anti-LGBTQ plus movements, and extremist communities have learned how to use algorithms to recruit, radicalize, and organize people at enormous scale. And once again, we see the same pattern we've discussed throughout this series. Fear becomes profitable. Hierarchy becomes profitable. Division becomes profitable. Meanwhile, many creators advocating for bodily autonomy, female empowerment, LGBTQ plus visibility, or racial justice report disproportionate censorship and suppression online. Words like period, menopause, miscarriage, and puberty have repeatedly triggered censorship systems on social media platforms. At the same time, exploitative and sexualized content often remains highly visible because it generates engagement and profit. This is important to understand clearly. The algorithm is not asking what helps human beings flourish. It is asking what keeps people emotionally activated long enough to remain profitable. And in a society already organized around hierarchy, those incentives amplify the system we already live inside and are trapped by. This is part of what makes the current moment so incredibly dangerous. Technology is not only reflecting American patriarchy, it is accelerating it at massive scale, across generations, across borders, and often faster than human beings are emotionally prepared to process. And before we move further into conversations about how we build differently, I promise we really are getting there soon, we must understand this clearly. We are so vulnerable to the ills of social media because American patriarchy is our norm. And we must disrupt this before technology makes it impossible to destroy. So here are your questions for today. What emotions are the technologies around you constantly trying to activate? Who benefits from your insecurity, your fear of others, or your self-doubt? And what becomes possible once we stop treating algorithms as neutral reflections of humanity instead of systems trained by the values of the world that created them? Now, if this episode resonated with you, share it with someone willing to think more critically about the technologies shaping our lives. And remember this: American patriarchy is not only being maintained through laws and institutions, it is also being upheld through the technologies teaching us what to fear, what to desire, and how to see ourselves.